My name is Nelisa Cata, and today it is my pleasure to take you through day 211 of our Bible reading plan. The plan has us in the book of Isaiah, and the chapters are chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. Lots to cover, so let's get right into it. Starting off with chapter 9, we see that it begins where chapter 8, verse 22 left off. And there is the prophet Isaiah describing the gloom that will fall upon Judah because of the imminent invasion by the Assyrians. The prophet identifies two specific regions in the north that will be most affected by this invasion, and he identifies these as the tribal grouping of Zebulun and Naphtali. Because of this exact reason, Zebulun and Naphtali then carry with them a promise, and this is the promise of a great light, which is later described in Matthew chapter 4, verse 15 to 16. Throughout the chapter, the prophet Isaiah sees and speaks as though these events of the coming of the Messiah are already happening. And so the chapter is really meant to serve as an encouragement to the nation of Israel that even though God has allowed the attack by the Assyrians, there is the promise of salvation through the coming of the Messiah and the coming of the great light. Moving on then to chapter 10, we see that it's divided into three parts. The first part is the author really revisiting the assigned reason for God's wrath in the first place. So this is iniquities in administering the law, and then unfairness or harsh treatment of those that are in need. And the author really makes the point that to sin by yourself is bad, but to cause another to sin by your words or your actions or laws that you've enacted is even worse in the eyes of God. The second part of the chapter is a description of how God uses Assyria as what he calls the rod of his anger to discipline Israel. It is worth noting that Assyria was regarded as a wicked nation, and so it becomes interesting to see how God uses this wicked nation to discipline Israel. The prophet Isaiah makes it very clear that Assyria will not conquer Israel by her own power or her own might, but will only do so by God's permission. This is a realization that Assyria doesn't quite come into, and so Assyria becomes haughty and Assyria becomes proud. Assyria just wants to charge forth and conquer every nation in sight. And for this arrogance, Assyria then attracts the wrath and the judgment of God. The author spends a great deal of time within this chapter describing the heart of Assyria and why this displeases God. He emphasizes particularly around verse 15 by using the analogy of the axe, the sword, the rod, and the staff to make the point that an instrument should not take credit for what the worker does with the instrument, and that the punishment of this is that God would send leanness on Assyria. It then ends off with an assurance, and this is an assurance to the nation of Israel that even though God has allowed for the attack by the Assyrians to take place, God will not hand over Israel completely to the enemy, but they can look forward to the emergence of a remnant because God always preserves his remnant. Looking now at chapter 11, verses 1 to 12, we see a description of the millennial reign of Christ. It is described here by the prophet of Isaiah, the coming of the Messiah in the distant future, and that this Messiah will actually come from the line of David. Isaiah makes it a point, though, to emphasize that the tree of the line of David will be cut off for a time, but that there will be the emergence of this remnant out of the stump of this tree, and then that remnant will continue to flourish. It ends with a note that emphasizes that once the Messiah has come, it will bring about peace. And so nations will war no more, conflicts will be resolved justly and swiftly, and enemies will receive their due punishment. Chapter 12 then, which is the last of our segment, really is a song of triumphant praise. It is praise that comes from the heart of one who has really surrendered themselves to this Messiah and is now enjoying the benefits of the Messiah's reign. I will end our summaries there for now. I look forward to a beautiful and rich discussion later on during our daily Zoom calls. I encourage you to join these, and until next time, God bless you.